The following is an audio white paper on Hallmark 4 of the 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program, risk assessments. A. Measuring your risk. Operationalizing your compliance program can take many shapes and forms. Using the entire risk management process to embed your compliance program within the contours of your organization is important. Key step, as it will allow you to have full visibility of your compliance risks through a longer life cycle. Forecasting allows you to consider your business strategy and wed the risks you can foresee. Risk assessments allow you to evaluate and measure known risks. Risk-based monitoring allows you to monitor both the compliance risks you know about and those you do not know on an ongoing basis. There are several key lessons to be considered by any chief compliance officer or compliance practitioner. The first is the process around risk management. Most compliance practitioners understand the need for a risk assessment as it is articulated as Hallmark 4 of the 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program. From the 2012 FCPA guidance, the DOJ and SEC said, assessment of risk is fundamental to developing a strong compliance program and is another factor the DOJ and SEC evaluate when assessing a company's compliance program. In addition to the business case, the 2012 FCPA guidance also specifies the enforcement reasons for performing a risk assessment. The DOJ and SEC will give meaningful credit to a company that implements a good faith, comprehensive risk-based compliance program, even if that program does not prevent an infraction in a low-risk area because greater attention and resources have been devoted to a higher-risk area. The DOJ evaluation of corporate compliance programs built upon this. As compliance evolves and as corporate compliance programs become more sophisticated, compliance is not seen as simply a legal prophylactic, but as a business process. Seen in this light, it is clear the risk management process should begin with forecasting as it attempts to estimate future aspects of your business. Compliance professionals should be able to say with some degree of authority what will happen in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and 24 months. This can facilitate resources deployment where you think it is appropriate in order to meet future demands. By starting with forecasting, a compliance function utilizes risk assessments to consider issues which forecasting did not predict for, or issues which the forecasting model raised as a potential outcome which warranted a deeper dive. If you are moving into a new product or sales area and are required to use third-party sales agents, a risk assessment would provide information that a company could use to ameliorate those risks. Risk-based monitoring follows on from the issues that your risk assessment identified as the highest risks. Risk-based monitoring tends to look at things on an ongoing basis, and the models are behind the risk-based modeling are continuously refined based upon incoming data. All three tools tie back into the process management and process improvement lifecycle. There is a balance between what is actually important for your business or for proper execution versus the practical aspects of the whole process. Ben Lachlan has noted, if you are not measuring at a high enough resolution, then you are not capturing a lot of the environment. Market forces and external factors that probably are of high leverage to your operations and business that you simply do not know about. For example, if there is a 1 in 3 chance of a compliance program failure occurring, which company knew in advance, the executive committee would almost stop the activity before there was a full compliance failure and possible legal violation. This is how the risk management process can fulfill the 3 prongs of an effective compliance program: to prevent, to detect, and remediate. You are using your risk forecast and you have a contingency in place which you execute upon. In other words, it comes down to execution. This means you have to use the high risk management tools available to you, and when the situation arises, you remediate when required. This is not only where the rubber hits the road, but the information and data you garner in the execution phase should be fed back into a process loop. From this, you will develop continuous feedback and continuous improvement. I have gone through this in some detail to emphasize the business process nature that compliance has evolved into as a corporate discipline. By using these techniques, the CCO or compliance practitioner makes the business run more efficiently and at the end of the day more profitably. The more you can bring these types of insights to a chief executive, the more you demonstrate how compliance adds to the bottom line and is not simply a cost center. B, how to perform a risk assessment. One cannot say enough about risk assessments in the context of an anti-corruption compliance program. Since at least 1999, in the Metcalfe and Eddy enforcement action, the Department of Justice has said risk assessments, which measure the likelihood and severity of possible FCPA violations, the manner in which you should direct your resources, and manage these risks. The 2012 FCPA guidance stated it succinctly when it said, assessment of risk is fundamental to developing a strong compliance program and is another factor the DOJ and SEC evaluate when assessing a company's compliance program. The language was supplemented in the 2017 FCPA corporate enforcement policy and in the evaluation of corporate compliance programs. Under prong 4 of the evaluation risk assessments, the following issues were raised. For risk assessment process, the following question: what methodology has the company used to identify, analyze, and address the particular risk it faced? Under the topic manifested risks, how has the company's risk assessment process accounted for the manifested risks? In the FCPA corporate enforcement policy, it stated, the effectiveness of a company's risk assessment and the manner in which the company's compliance program has been tailored on that risk assessment. The risk assessment determines the areas at greatest risk for FCPA violation among the types of international business transaction and operations, the business culture of each country in which these activities occur, and the integrity and reputation of third parties engaged on behalf of the company. The simple reason is straightforward. One cannot define, plan for, or designate an effective compliance program to prevent bribery and corruption unless you measure the risks you face. Rick Mezek laid out 4 steps of a risk assessment as follows. First, all conceivable forms of risk to which the organization, the activity, the sector, or project might be exposed is cataloged. Second, an estimate of how likely it is that each of these possible forms of corruption will occur is prepared. And third, an estimate of the harm that will result if each occurs is developed. Fourth, combines the chances of the occurrence with the probability of its impact and to produce a list of risks by priority. What should you assess? In 2011, the Department of Justice concluded 3 FCPA enforcement actions which specified what a company should review when making a risk assessment. The 3 enforcement actions were involving the companies Alcatel-Lucent, Maxwell Technologies, and Tyson Foods. All had common areas that the Department of Justice indicated were compliance risk areas which should have been evaluated for a minimum best practices compliance program. In both the Alcatel-Lucent and Maxwell Technologies, the deferred prosecution agreements listed the 7 areas of risk to be assessed, which are still relevant today. Number 1, geography. Where does your company do business? 2, interactions with types and levels of government. 3, industrial sector of operations. 4, involvement with joint ventures. 5, licenses and permits in operations. 6, the degree of government oversight. 7, volume of importance of goods and personnel going through customs and immigration. All of these factors were reiterated in the 2012 FCPA guidance, which stated, factors to consider, for instance, which include risks presented by the country and industry sector, the business opportunity, potential business partners, the level of involvement of governments, amount of government regulation and oversight, and exposure to customs and immigration in conducting business affairs. These factors provide guidance into some of the key areas the Department of Justice believed can put a company at higher corruption risks. These factors supplement those listed in the now withdrawn UK Bribery Act consultative guidance, which stated risk assessments. The commercial organization regularly and comprehensively assesses the nature and extent of risks related to bribery which it is exposed. The UK Bribery Act consultative guidance pointed towards several key risk areas to be evaluated in this process. These risks included internal risk, which could include deficiencies in employee knowledge of a company's business profile and understanding of associated bribery and corruption risks, employee training or skill sets, and the company's compensation structure or lack of clarity in the policy on gifts, entertainment, and travel expenses. 2. Country risk. This type of risk could include A. Perceived high levels of corruption as highlighted by corruption league tables published by reputable non-governmental organizations such as Transparency International. B. Factors such as absence of anti-bribery legislation and implementation and a perceived lack of capacity of the government, media, business community, and civil society to effectively promote transparent procurement and investment policies. And C. A culture which does not punish those who seek to report bribes or make other extortion attempts. 3. Transaction risks. This could entail items such as transactions involving charitable donations or political contributions, the obtaining of licenses and permits, the public procurement, high value or projects with many contractors or involvement of intermediaries or agents. 4. Partnership risks. These risks could include those involving foreign business partners located in higher risk jurisdictions, associated with prominent public office holders, insufficient knowledge or transparency of third-party process and controls. Another approach was detailed by David Lawler in his book Frequently Asked Questions on Anti-Bribery and Anti-Corruption, where he broke risk areas to be evaluated down into the following categories: 1. Company risk, 2. Country risk, 3. Sector risk, 4. Transaction risk, and 5. Business partnership risks. He defined these categories as follows. Number 1, company risks. Lawler believes this is only to be likely to be relevant when assessing a number of different companies, either when managing a portfolio of companies from the perspective of a head office or a conglomerate or a private equity house. High-risk companies involve some of the following characteristics: private companies with a close shareholder group, large, diverse, and complex groups with decentralized management structures, an autocratic top management, previous history of compliance issues, and/or poor marketplace perception. 2. Country risks. This area involves countries which have reported a high level of or perception of corruption, have failed to enact effective anti-corruption legislation, and have a failure to be transparent in procurement and investment policies. Obviously, the most recent annual Transparency International Corruption Perception Index can be a good starting point. Other indices you might want to consider are the World Governance Indicators and the Global Integrity Index. 3. Sector risk. These involve areas which require a significant amount of government licensing or permitting to do business in a country. It includes the usual suspects of extractive industries, oil and gas services, large-scale infrastructure, telecoms, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and healthcare, and financial services. 4. Transaction risks. Lawler says that this risk, first and foremost, identifies and analyzes the financial aspects of a payment or deal. This means it is necessary to think about where your money is ending up. Indicia of transaction risk include high-risk projects, involve many contractors or other third-party intermediaries, and/or do not appear to have a legitimate, clear objectives. 5. Business partnership risk. This prong recognizes that certain manners of doing business present more corruption risk than others. It may include use of third-party representatives in transactions with foreign government officials, a number of consortium partners or joint venture partners, and/or relationships with politically exposed persons. One of the questions I hear most often is, how does one actually perform a risk assessment? Mike Volkov has suggested a couple of different approaches in his article, Practical Suggestions for Conducting Risk Assessments. In it, Volkov differentiates between smaller companies which might use some basic tools such as personnel or telephone interviews of key employees, surveys and questions of employees, review of historical compliance information such as due diligence files for third parties and mergers and acquisitions, as well as internal audit of key offices from larger companies. Such larger companies may use these basic techniques, but may also include a deeper dive into high-risk countries or high-risk business areas. If your company's sales model uses third-party representatives or persons to help evaluate their risk for bribery and corruption, you may well be attributed to your company. There are a number of ways you can slice and dice your basic inquiry. With almost all FCPA compliance, it is important that your protocol be well thought out. If you use one, some, or all of the above as your basic techniques into risk assessment, it will be acceptable for your starting point. C. How do you evaluate a risk assessment? After you complete your risk assessment, you must translate it into a risk profile, or as Rick Mezek has noted, if the estimate of where the bribery is likely to occur or its impact, if it does occur, is wrong, prevention efforts will not properly be targeted. Ben Lockwood explained, once we have assessed risk and determined a process that includes options to resolve and manage those risks whenever appropriate, we can then decide the level of resources with which to prioritize them. There will always be latent risks, those that we understand are there, but we cannot chase forever. We need to make sure that we have classified them correctly. With a good understanding of each of these, we are in a better position to speak about the quality of our businesses. Bill Anathasis, in an article entitled Rethinking FCPA Compliance Strategies in a New Area of Enforcement, posited that companies assume that FCPA violations will follow a bell curve distribution where the majority of employees are responsible for the majority of violations. However, he believed that the distribution pattern more closely follows a hockey stick distribution where a select few commit virtually all the violations. He concluded by noting that this group of employees, what he terms the shaft of the hockey stick, to which a company should devote the majority of its compliance resources. With a proper risk assessment, a company can then focus its compliance efforts, such as intensive training sessions or focused analysis of key financial transactions, on those individuals with the opportunity and potential inclination to violate the statute. This focus will provide companies with the greatest financial value and practical worth of compliance efforts. Lawler suggested that you combine the scores or analysis you have obtained from the corruption markers you reviewed, whether it be the DOJ list, whether it be the markers under the UK Bribery Act or something else. From there, create a rudimentary risk scoring that ranks the things to review using risk indicators of potential bribery. This ensures that high-risk exposures are done first or given more time. With all the populations of this type, there will likely be a normal or bell curve distribution around the mean. A 10 to 15% exposure falls into a relatively low-risk category, the vast majority, 70 to 80%, into a moderate risk category, and the final 10 to 15% would be your highest risk. In an article entitled Improving Risk Assessment and Audit Operations, Tammy Whitehouse focused on how one company, the Timken Company, created a risk matrix to evaluate risks determined by the company's risk assessment. Once risks are identified, they are then rated according to the significance and likelihood of occurring, and then plotted on a heat map to determine priority. The most significant risks with the greatest likelihood of occurring are deemed the priority risks, which would become the focus of the audit monitoring plan. A variety of solutions and tools can be used to manage these risks going forward, but a key step is to evaluate and rate those risks. At Timken, the most significant risks with the greatest likelihood of occurring are deemed to be the priority risk. Those severe risks become the focus of audit monitoring plan going forward. A variety of tools can be used to continuously monitor risk going forward. However, you should not forget the human factor. At Timken, one of the methods used by the compliance group to manage such risk is by providing employees with substantive training to guard against the most significant risks coming to pass, to keep the messages fresh and on the top of the minds of all employees that are deemed high risk. The company also produces a risk control summary that succinctly documents the nature of the risk and the actions taken against it. The key to the Timken approach is the action steps prescribed by their analysis. This is another way of saying that the risk assessment informs your compliance program and not vice versa. This is the approach set forth by the DOJ from the 2012 guidance up to the evaluation of corporate compliance programs and ending with the new FCPA corporate enforcement policy. I believe that the DOJ wants to see a reasoned approach with regard to the actions a company takes in the compliance arena. The model set forth by Timken is certainly a well-reasoned approach and can provide the articulation needed to explain the steps which were taken. The end. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist. I hope you've enjoyed this audio white paper on Hallmark 4 of the 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program, risk assessments. This audio white paper came from my new book, The Complete Compliance Handbook, which will be published next month by Compliance Week. You can check out information on it, and it's available for pre-sale at my website, www.fcpacompliancereport.com. Thank you for listening.